Hey, welcome back to Hobbit Racing Park. Today we're at the bench doing a quick little tutorial about body float. Body float is not just about backing off your screws so that your body can actually float on the top of your chassis to give that extra help in the turn, since we know that even the littlest amount of spring suspension or other types of washers, rubber washers, they still provide, limited amount of help. So it's a takes a village approach, right? Everything you can do to build up suspension for your car, the better it's going to handle, the faster you're going to be able to stay on the throttle, the longer you'll be able to stay on the throttle in the corners. So let's take a look right here. Right here we have a very, very old livery, hard to come by. I was fortunate enough to do so, so it's going to be my next Group C build. Now this could apply to a Group C, an LMP, anything that has a boxy chassis that is going to have a front diffuser and a rear diffuser plate that is going to be very close. And at the end of the day, you might have to even check out some other kinds of cars. There are cars that don't even have motor pods. You really could do this to any car, but I'm using this as a great example because you can see how close the chassis is already. But if you'll already also notice, I've already done the majority of this chassis. You can see that sliver of daylight in between the edges of it. So there's multiple ways we can achieve this, okay? We have our Dremel. You can put a cutoff disc. You could even put a sanding wheel on here. I would recommend putting a cutoff disc on here. It's going to be harder compound to be able to deal with as far as the kind of ABS plastic and whatnot. And then, you're going to be able to do things with a file afterwards to be able to make them easily, calmed down after you have those chips of plastic. So ultimately, you're just looking for a little bit. You're not looking for much. We're moving our things out of the way, and we'll just give an example of what I'm talking about here. All I'm doing is just easy coming down. Or if you don't like that, if you're afraid you're going to cut in, then you can come against it just like this. Get used to it. Take an old chassis, take an old piece of plastic, and give it a go. And then what you'll find is these little flecks end up coming off of here. These pieces end up coming off of here, and you'll start to notice that you're making a difference, right? One of the areas that I really was paying close attention to was the end, because I didn't like how much the diffuser caught on the end of these beautiful Porsches, and so I didn't like that clicky nature of everything back there. So I really went into it here for a little bit. I really decided I was going to even shoot. I rounded my edges, within reason. I'm not chopping the chassis to pieces, but I'm doing enough to give myself just a little bit of help so that I can get just an amount of extra body float. It's allowed in our classes. It's allowed under the specifications. Just check with your race director. He says, no, box stock, don't be taking a Dremel to this. No one else is going to do that. Okay, well then fair enough. Listen, we're competitive, but we're friendly racers, but we're competitive, and we have things that we want to do to turn these, let's face it, what is otherwise a toy into a competitive setup here. One other thing that I will note, it wasn't necessarily the goal of this short video. Some of the older Group Cs do not have the same pass-through that newer ones do, or even any newer slotted for that matter, where you have something that is, a place where the wire coming from the motor up to your guide comes underneath a part of the axle block. And so in this particular case, I'll try and get a really good shot of it. The axle block and the chassis came together and did not even allow the motor wires to come through without hitting the axle when I had the axle spinning. So carefully, and again, it's your level of detail. Take a file, take an X-Acto knife. Listen, I was more than comfortable enough. I've been doing this a very long time. Try and get the camera out of the way and show you what I did. I took my cutoff wheel and I went right against the axle block, and I created the pathway for my motor wire to go underneath so that when I give my front wheel a spin, it spins freely, right? Nothing like driving with the brakes on. That's not a good idea. So you get the idea. Whatever you're comfortable with, whether it be a file, whether it be sandpaper, whether it be this, give yourself just enough if it's within the specifications of your class, because especially these boxy Group C, again, these were borderline on the verge of prototype cars before we called them Le Mans prototypes, right? There's beautiful Porsche here, obviously. Again, you can take in that livery if you'd like for a moment. But the idea is, right, look now, I've immediately, forget about doing it that way. I can tell you with my hand, I've immediately created some float around there with just enough. You know, I've taken off just a hair. You know, there's a good example you can really see. When I took this out of the box, I can tell you there was no daylight. There was absolutely no daylight coming in underneath that. And now you've got just the tiniest little bit of daylight. And then when I set my front and rear screws in there and I go to test that float when I'm finally ready to go, I'm not going to be worried about anything grabbing onto that or making anything loose. The one last thing I would say is, for sure, again, it doesn't matter whether you're taking sandpaper or a file or what it is that you prefer, but definitely go over those edges. You're going to get the big chunks to fall right away with your finger when you use the Dremel. But when you come back with a file, that's when you're going to figure out that going with a file is going to do far more for you than just taking that Dremel. In particular, I will show you right away, if I can do this under the camera, that by taking a file, you're immediately going to get those shavings coming up here that you can see, and there they are. And now they're gone. That's what's going to create your smooth edge. That's what's going to create that nice line that you're looking for that doesn't get caught up here, right? Do the rough work, but don't cheat. Come back with a file or sandpaper. Hope that helps anybody out there who is interested in creating additional help with body float.